Hi, I'm Jagu on the Policy Project podcast, and today we're going to look at the story of Mr. Abhijit Nair. Now, Abhijit traveled to the UAE back in 2012. He had one dream, a dream to make it big. So he started working with a few odd jobs. He started a small retail grocery store. This is in the mainland area. This is after he took a loan from the bank. All of that happened. Soon, his business started booming. And Abhijit invested all the profits back into the business so that he could expand and, grow by opening multiple outlets. But as fate would have it, while he was chasing this growth, a tragedy hit. One of his retail stores caught fire and they suffered irrecoverable damages, which also ended up leading to third-party injuries. Now, Abhijit has to deal with major damages as well as repairs. All of this out of pocket because he does not have business insurance cover. In fact, he may have to shut down his business and leave the country altogether. And this is what we're going to look at on today's podcast. Welcome to the Policy Project podcast by policybazaar.ae. And in this episode, we cover important topics related to how and why insurance is extremely important for small businesses. On today's show, we have with us Neeraj Gupta. He's the CEO of Policybazaar UAE, and Vinamra Agarwal, the corporate insurance specialist at Policybazaar UAE. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jagu, for having me here.
Thanks, Jagu, for inviting me, and lovely to be here.
Entirely our pleasure. Now, Vinamra is joining us for the first time. So he is a corporate insurance specialist. Now, Vinamra has spent years mastering the art of placing insurance policies for companies. This is across industries. And he's an expert in property, casualty, and financial lines. Neeraj, of course, we're familiar with because he's been part of the podcast since the beginning. He is the CEO of policybazaar.ae and comes with a wealth of knowledge and experience from a career in the financial industry that has been committed to fostering transparency and a financially aware society. And I can't begin to tell you how important that is. And of course, he's been part of the insurance industry in different geographies for many years now. Vinamra, very quickly, before we kick off on dealing with Abhijit Nair's situation, tell us a little bit about what you do now.
So currently I'm taking care of business insurance piece here for Policybazaar UAE, which includes employee benefits and non-employee benefits vertical. So in employee benefits, we have policies like group health insurance, group personal accident and all of that. And on the non-employee benefits side, we have commercial policies. So property risks, engineering, liabilities and all of that. So my role majorly involves interacting with startups of all sorts, advising them on what set of policies they should buy for various sort of risks. Because nowadays there are a lot of emerging risks. So we have a lot of offerings. So one of the most major roles is to help these founders and people find the right policy at the right price from the right insurance company. So majorly this is what my role is. And obviously then I have other things to take care of from operations and customer service and other verticals.
Fair enough. So listen, your expertise is going to come very handy in resolving this situation. But Neeraj, before we explore a solution with Vinamra, let me ask you, what do you think went wrong in Abhijit Nair's situation?
Jagu, this we face in both sides, on the business side as well as the retail side, right? Till if it's a very compulsory and a regulated driven product, nobody wants to really think about it and buy it, right? And on the business side also, especially on the entrepreneur startup, see, we understand you're always cost constrained. You have limited funds, right? Which you believe you want to spend on business and then look after it, rather than buy something as an insurance you might never use, right? But what we've been trying to tell business houses is, as a percentage of the total cost, it's a very minuscule cost. But at the same time, what it protects you is, like, for example, in Mr. Nair's situation, right? It protects you against a huge loss, which can really wipe out whatever you've done so far, right? The challenge with us in explaining to the business houses is these are very critical, and at times you have to tell them certain situations where this help. And that is what we are trying to do with our customers, where we are trying to give them live examples on the situations that has happened with people and how an insurance helped or how not having an insurance really led to a disaster.
Neeraj, completely valid point. So now, Vinamra, let me come to you with this. What is the solution to this situation that Abhijit Nair finds himself in?
The solution for Mr. Abhijit Nair is to see if his bank has taken out any loan for his assets. Because in UAE, or not just in UAE, but across the globe, if you take any loan to start a business, so whatever assets you are taking a loan against, let's suppose you have started a business worth 500,000. So if you take out for 300,000 dirhams, you need to insure assets against which you have taken out a loan. So if he has an insurance policy for those assets, then he can obviously recover maybe, a certain percentage of his loss.
And Vinamra, let me ask you this. What happens if he has no insurance whatsoever? He's forgotten.
So if he has no insurance in place, Jaggu, then he really can't do anything. He needs to restart his business and make sure that he is now insured. Because what happens is, in free zones, like basically in Dubai, you have two sets of areas. One is a mainland area, and then we have free zone. So in a mainland, it's not mandatory to have an SME package insurance in place. Whereas in a free zone, it's compulsory. If you have to have a trade license, if you need to renew your trade license, you need to have an SME package insurance. But for Mr. Nair, at the moment, he doesn't really have any option but to buy the policy the next time he starts a business. Otherwise, he'll have to return home.
Unfortunate but true. Now, Neeraj, let me come to you. You're pretty much in a startup environment yourself as policybazaar.ae, even though the mothership is very well established. Look at it from your personal point of view. What is this reluctance of entrepreneurs to take insurance when we're quite clear what the advantages of it are? Do you face this in the UAE?
So, Jaggu, very valid point that you've brought in. And there's a very famous saying on insurance, right? This is a product which costs you money and nobody wants to use it, hopefully. Now, if you look at that, the costs are minuscule. If you look at it from a business perspective, right? So I'll just give you a small, simple example. If you have an office space of 800,000 square feet, you have a couple of people working, and I'm not talking about inventory that you have, but typically you have all equipments like computers, locker, and some documents in the office. A typical SME package policy is going to cost you sub 1,500 dirhams, probably about 800,000 dirhams, right? Now, if you look at that from a scheme of things, it's probably less than your weekly cost of tea that you have in the office, right? But obviously, the moment you have a corporate site which has multiple locations, you have a warehouse, you have contents, for example, deal with some retail sort of a product, for example, FMCG products. Now, if you have a warehouse which has so many products, now at that time, obviously, stock value has a reflection on the insurance premium. But having said that, it is not going to be substantial. It's going to be very minuscule if you look at it and break that cost down over 12 months.
Fair point, Neeraj. Now, Vinamra, let me come to you with this. We're clear about the advantages of insurance. On paper, you put it in point form, it makes perfect sense. But now, insurance is a catch-all phrase. When it comes to business insurance, what all is included? Just so that we get a perspective of these are the advantages and these are the coverages that you have.
So let's take Mr. Nair's example only here. If Mr. Nair was insured, so he would be able to get his assets covered. If let's say if he owned the building, then the structure would be covered. If he had a workers' compensation policy, which is a part of the SME package policy, his workers would be covered. So in this example, let's say his retail shop caught fire. And it could be a possibility that the fire could engulf nearby areas as well. There could, let's say, hypothetically be a printing press, for an example, next to his retail store. So if his retail store catches fire, it may engulf the nearby printing press as well, which becomes a third-party liability for Mr. Nair. So this also is an additional risk which gets covered in our SME package policy. Apart from this, most importantly, revenue loss is something that also is covered in this policy, which comes as a business interruption coverage. Because of fire, obviously, he will not be able to continue his business, right? The store will remain shut maybe for 4 or 5 months or maybe longer. So for how many ever months the store remains closed for? So for that duration, whatever revenue he has lost, that also gets covered by the policy. So that ways, this SME package policy offers a comprehensive coverage compared to a basic policy which would only cover fixed assets of Mr. Nair, which would primarily be the building, the structure, as we may call it, or his assets. That's about it. So risks like third-party liability, workers' compensation coverage, revenue loss coverage, all these coverages are not available in a basic policy.
Okay. So, look, we know the advantages of having a policy like that. But Neeraj, here's the thing, right? We only know those advantages when we have to claim. Every year, nobody's claiming. I mean, God forbid he's never claiming. But he or she has to factor in this is going to be an annual cost. And sometimes that is the driving force. How much money do I have to put down in this? What are we talking about in terms of costing? What does something like this cost?
Jagu, you've absolutely laid it out. As a layman, for example, if I start a business today, I wouldn't know what type of insurances I need on what can happen to my business and what can I protect against, right? So typically, as a policy buyer, what you should speak to your consultant or the person you're buying the policy or you're having a discussion with, you should lay out what is your business model. Explain to the person what your business model is. How do you incur cost? How do you earn revenue? If you have stocks, how does the stock get stored? Explain that in entirety. And that is where the consultant role comes in to now understand the various risk elements that come in and evaluate those risks with you on a priority level. See, if you look at it and you look at from a risk perspective, everything can have a risk. But now you need to evaluate how critical that risk is or how likelihood of that risk is. And you also see it as an experience level on the region, on the area where the office is located, what has happened. So as a buyer also, insurance, you can take a learning from us, probably just have a general awareness on different types of offices or businesses which are running in the nearby area, speak to a couple of people on what, if any, untoward incident has happened in the past. So that gives you a sense of an understanding on what you should be looking at. And at the same time, the consultant role or the provider of the insurance role is to understand all these risks in detail and come back to you with different solutions.
Okay, absolutely. So, Vinamra, let me come to you with this. To get into a little more detail, we have the advantages, we have a costing, and of course, depending on the stock that you have or the size of the organization, obviously those numbers will change depending on institution to institution. But we have all of that now in terms of tenure, in terms of what should be the inclusions in the policy, the fine print. What does somebody who's looking to get such a policy look out for? Costing, tenure, fine print, inclusions?
This is a very good question, Jagu, and this is something that a lot of customers don't really think about, which creates a lot of policies in the market, especially with regards to casualty products. So here, most important segment or most important piece on the policy is your warranties. So warranties, to put in simple words, are basically conditions that an insurance company puts out. That, let's take Mr. Nair's case, for example. The insurance company could put out warranties saying that you need to have, let's say, 5 to 7 fire extinguishers in place. Your stocks should be stored 1 feet above ground level to avoid losses emanating from floods or natural disasters. Then we could also have a warranty where the company is saying we are not going to pay you if you do not have a fire alarm in place or if your premise is not guarded 24/7. So these are like fine prints which are there on the policy which are normally overlooked. And this is only talked about at the time of claim when the insured realizes that his claim is not going to be paid because these warranties were not met. So that is where we come in as risk advisors, because I have these type of policies for complex occupancies. So when I say occupancy, I'm talking about policies for warehouses. So let's suppose we have an insurer, we have to, let's say, suggest a client who has a warehouse that contains wood-based stocks, right? So there, the level of analysis that goes in is pretty intensive. The survey needs to be done. When a survey is carried out, all these warranties are put on the policy. Apart from this, you should also look for a comprehensive cover. By default, these policies give you coverage against fire, natural calamities, theft, loss to your assets, including money from all these scenarios, including robbery, riots, strikes, malicious damage, landslide, So normally what happens is, even in a comprehensive policy, you don't get all these perils covered. So if you are able to advise a client properly, ideally the policy should be designed in such a way that all these major perils are covered, just so that at the time of claim you don't come across surprises. So another important factor that Mr. Nair or anybody who's buying an SME package insurance policy should be aware of is the underinsurance clause. So what underinsurance means is, you, let's say, have stocks worth 500 dirhams in reality, and you have insured only 300 dirhams worth of stock. So when there is a total loss, so by total loss I mean there's a 100% loss. Your stocks worth 500 dirhams have literally gone because of fire. So you will definitely be getting paid partially for just 300 dirhams worth of stock. And for not insuring the remaining 200 dirhams of stock is what will attract a penalty, which is going to be, I think, roughly around 10%. It could work out to 10%. So this is something that we as consultants have to be very aware about, and have to make sure that the client knows this and understands this, because there are a lot of customers who come in saying that I have stocks worth 500,000 dirhams, but just to save premium, I want to get only stocks worth 200 dirhams insured. I do not want to insure the remaining stock.
It's actually an interesting thing. One thinks of taking insurance when you buy yourself a policy. In my head, I'm thinking, I've got it, I have signed it, I've paid my premium, now it's not my problem. But you've just laid out a list of warranties, or literally some of these are responsibilities at my end that I need to be careful about,
Right.
because otherwise it's null and void in effect, which is where a risk advisor like Policybazaar would come in. Am I right?
Correct. And also, one point that I want to add to this is, theft interest on the policy is covered only for the first 7 days. Normally, if you see that theft is covered on the policy, you would assume, or Mr. Nair would assume, it's covered for the entire policy period. However, it's only covered for the first 7 days. So this is something that can be changed by speaking to the insurance company. You can get that amended to give you a coverage from theft related incidents on an annual basis for the entire policy period. So this is just one example. There are other examples as well, which could be related to, let's say, revenue loss. There is always a deductible on all general insurance policies. So deductible is basically an amount you pay at the time of a claim, or basically the insurance company will deduct whenever they pay out a claim.
Is that something that one can negotiate in terms of, I will only give this much as a deductible and then the rest is the insurance company's problem?
Yes, that can be negotiated. So this is where the insurance company basically diversifies its risk. And
Okay.
the deductible basically comes into the picture just to make sure that the client also has his skin in the game, right? Because whenever there is going to be a loss, the client would know that the first few bucks are going to go out of my pocket, right? So if this we can try to bring down as much as possible, especially for Mr. Nair, who just started off, right, by taking out a business loan on a policy with, let's say he has a coverage of only 500,000, he cannot be having a deductible of 50,000 dirhams, right? We have to bring this down to the lowest possible number in the range of, let's say, 2 to 3,000 dirhams. It is a possibility, but you need to speak with the insurance company, have to make them understand, most importantly, that the risk that we are trying to write is well protected. In When I say well protected, I mean Mr. Nair has necessary safety measures in place to make sure that whenever there is an accident, the magnitude of loss is not going to be unfathomable. It's going to be limited because we have requisite safety measures in place. So
Absolutely.
using these type of points, we can obviously negotiate these type of clauses on the policy. And it's not just limited to property, but it's limited to all type of policies, be it employee benefits, be it liability policies, cyber insurance, professional indemnity. The same process can be extrapolated across all products. And that is where my expertise comes into the picture, or our company's expertise comes into the picture, because we have done this in the past. We have seen claims, and we have really seen these negotiations playing out in the favor of our clients at the time of claim.
I can imagine.
So it's really exciting because these things client don't know.
No, absolutely. And that is completely the advantage of, at least one of the advantages of going to a professional like Policybazaar to figure this stuff out. You want to get it right the first time around so that you don't have any regrets at some later point. Now, Neeraj, those were the nitty gritties, and some of them were eye opening in all honesty. But Look, there's different types of people that come to you, individuals all the way up to multinational corporations. Now, let's say at the top end of the range, they have their legal teams. They're a little more savvy about insurance. They know what they're getting into. They will have discussions with Vinamra and figure stuff out. But for a small business owner, from a big picture point of view, what should they be looking out for when they're looking at buying business insurance? Just, the top 3 or top 5 points.
So if you look at it, typically whenever you are building up a business, right, you're so involved in building up the business. And at times you're not really evaluating the risks probably, right? And also the cost elements are very important for you because you're starting up, you have limited funds. So it's more about revenue growth, right? So at that point of time, you start to forget or start to undermine the risk components. And whereas when you are running a business, there are risks. Like as what happened in Mr. I's situation, the retail shop caught fire, right? Now you have an inventory in the shop, you have different aspects, right? You need to protect that because this you can't predict. And you've seen in multiple cases, we've heard in multiple cases, this and this company or the industrial compound or the shop got gutted in fire, and the owner really had to sell off everything to cover up the expenses or lost the stuff. Because if you realize in any retail shop, the products which are there are probably on credit. You've not paid for it, right? So I believe when you're growing as a business, you need to account for certain eventualities. And that is where policybazaar.ae comes in. And our objective with the policy project is to make people aware of those risks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, that is great advice. Both of you all, Neeraj and Vinamra, thanks so much for doing this, joining us today, sharing your expertise with our listeners. And if you're a small business owner, remember, it's not just a smart decision or an advantage. Insurance is practically a necessity for the success and protection of your business. That's about it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being part of this, both of you all, and no doubt we'll be hearing more from you all in our future episodes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Policy Project. So here's our key takeaways from today's conversation. Remember, from a business perspective, the cost of getting business insurance is minuscule, but the consequences of not having insurance are massive. Also, a comprehensive business insurance includes your assets, workers' compensation, third-party liability, and business interruption coverage. A basic policy doesn't cover all of this, so it's better to get a comprehensive package. And remember that business insurance policies come with many clauses, such as warranties, which are conditions added by insurance agencies to reduce their risk as well as yours. For example, they may require you to have fire alarms and extinguishers in your office or warehouse. So to ensure that you stay compliant and receive your claims when needed, it's essential to carefully read and understand these warranties before purchasing business insurance. It's important that you take a closer look at your policy to make sure that you're fully protected. And finally, keep in mind that the terms and conditions of your insurance policy can be negotiated. However, most people don't know this, and so they miss out on the best offers. That's where Policy Bazaar's expertise comes into the picture. So, keep in mind that business insurance is not at all that expensive or complicated if you take the help of a good consultant like Policy Bazaar. And that wraps it up for this episode of The Policy Project. I am Jagu, and we'll be back with a lot more on insurance and protecting yourself wisely on our forthcoming episodes. So remember to follow us and get notified about forthcoming episodes on your favorite podcast platform.